Welcome to She Blaze, where we're bringing you cannabis culture from a woman's point of view. And as always, here to elevate the cannabis industry. I'm one of your hosts, Ice Dawson, Cannabis Socialite.
And I am Dasheeda Dawson, the WeedHead.
Hi, sis. Hey, sis.
Hey, sis.
Hey, sis. On today's episode of She Blaze, DC Congresswoman wants housing and urban development to change its cannabis policy. New Mexico tries to answer the product shortage, and Virginia is taking the next steps to finalize legalization.
Woo woo. Well, as always, we've had the busiest week ever. You always find the tea. I'm excited to jump into my high of the week, our high of the week. So my high of the week is actually a combination of both like a girl crush, but also just really doing it for the people. So I want to shout out Eve Marie Santana, who is the founder and CEO of Hi Beautiful. Hi Beautiful. She is one of the pioneers in the industry, certainly in the Northeast, particularly in Rhode Island. And this past week, she dropped a no to Norm Berenbaum in New York as the executive director position. And she created a petition around it, and I'm supportive of the petition. The bill has been legalized. It's the most equity-centered bill in the country, but New York has also arrested more people than anyone else in the country for cannabis possession. And I believe we need leadership in New York that's actually representative of where the intent of the bill was, really brought from. So shout out to Eve. Go sign that petition. We do have the link. I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the comments for everybody to go check out the petition. It's just important for us to know that the fight doesn't stop after the bill is signed. You have to have good leadership, equity-centered leadership, in order for you to see things executed as you would want.
Yes, well, shout out to her. You know, it takes a lot of strength to even take a position to really keep the community in mind, especially during legalization and everybody throwing money bags around. You know what I'm saying? So shout out to her for standing up for something. And my high of the week is also celebrating people within our industry as well. So I wanted to celebrate Asian Pacific Islander American History Month with, cannabis leaders in the industry. And there was a report released by Green Market, and they did a huge list of people within the industry. And shout out to Kristen Jordan, who we worked with a lot of times. And so we know her pretty well. And she's done so many great things within the industry. And so she made the list. Now, I will say I was surprised, that my Cannabestie, Dr. Monica Tang Farm D, was not on the list. So I was like, okay, well, I don't know who's doing the research. But, y'all could have called us because we know quite a few people. So I would like to give a shout out to her because we've worked with her a bunch as well. And, she is always on top of her cannabis knowledge, competency, and also be having an inclusive and diverse industry.
1000%. I live for Dr. Monica. She's also a board member for the Association for Cannabis Health Equity and Medicine. And we have worked in so many ways, from M4MM to Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. It is really fortunate that we had such a big list. We had a couple other people that I was really excited about. Shalene Title, who's vice chair of the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition, Tarhi Chappelle. There was a good mix, right? But yes, that was a glaring miss to me, because Dr. Tang has been, she was the first cannabis pharmacist in New Jersey, and New Jersey having legalized is a really important part of her advocacy and leadership and the like. But I think shout out to all of our Asian American, Pacific Islander CannaFam in the industry that's really doing it. Yes. I'm excited to see that is also growing, because there's been, remember when we first started, it was like we had Ted Chung and that was it.
Right. That's what I was going to say. They have the type of percentages we have within the industry, where we are, you know, some people say we're 2-3%, 1%, you know, but whatever the case may be, we not 5, 10, 15, you know. So I think with them being leaders within the industry is just going to keep opening the floodgates, to your point of making it more diverse.
Absolutely. And that's part of since we started in this industry is like we're trying to diversify. So shout out to Green Market for dropping that list. I think it's important that we celebrate all of us at this point, especially those who are really had various harms done to us as a result of the criminalization in a disproportionate way. And so I always am, we've been talking a lot about why, or how do we include Asian American and Pacific Islanders in that conversation? Because the data isn't necessarily there, right? The data is there for Black, Indigenous, and Latinx, but just because the data is not there doesn't necessarily mean the damage isn't there, especially among the immigrant population. And I just want to just use this opportunity as our platform to kind of say, we need to keep looking, and we need to also keep ensuring that anybody that's been damaged by this, of all, communities, is no longer. But I always go back to being a medical student. When you triage, you got to treat the most critical situations first. And right now, what's happening with Black, Indigenous, and Latinx populations across the country because of cannabis criminalization and what has happened, it is the most critical at this point.
Okay, and we have some critical things going on in our hot topic and our main topic. So let's get into the tea, sis.
Okay.
And the first hot topic is about DC Congresswoman who really, she is really standing up for change right now. And this is really important to the cannabis industry. And so let me tell you why. Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, Democrat out of DC, she sent an open letter to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, telling them to use executive discretion to not enforce policies that prohibit cannabis use in federally assisted housing in states that have enacted legalization. Now, we talk about this all the time, and New York tried to put in some implementation of protecting people with assisted housing, but we see this time and time again, people getting kicked out, people getting fined, people not even being able to apply and actually get approval for assisted living because of being a medical marijuana patient. So, this came 2 weeks after she did file legislation on the floor to help protect housing assistance with medical marijuana patients or legalized states. However, we know what's happening on the Congress floor, and we also know what ain't happening and what's not getting through. And so with all the things that are happening, ultimately, she feels like people in the executive branch could do a better job of, not over policing and holding up outdated policies that do not apply to every state.
That is facts. I want to just give a shout out to this Congresswoman who is just honestly, she's doing what's in the best interest of constituents. We've seen far too often, as soon as Illinois legalized, Chicago public housing was like, not up in here. And it's like, okay, so did we legalize or not? Right? Because that's how it feels when you're still being policed in a way that prevents you from leveraging what the plant can do for you, certainly medicinally. And we know it is that inherently. And so I'm really struggling with that as still an issue because it definitely disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities, disproportionately impacts low-income communities. We all have those same cycles of struggle and poverty. And this plan has been part of perpetuating those cycles. And so I do think we do have to move forward our implementation of policies. For so long, we've been able to look the other way on certain things. We can decide what we enforce and to what extent and what we don't. And what I don't like is sometimes I feel like when it comes to Black and Brown communities or impoverished communities, what we do is we want to be like enforcing to the T, even though we know this was created in 1800 something. And I feel like it just doesn't make sense. We're in 2021. We've got a lot of science. We're in a digital age. Everybody can Google cannabinoid. Everybody can Google endocannabinoid system. Take it in. We're not all, in some crazy conspiracy theory at this point. Even the DEA has opened up licensing as far as medical marijuana growing and cultivation is concerned. So I want to just give a shout out to her because she's doing the right thing. The country is starting to capitalize in more ways than one, and we should not be leaving behind our most vulnerable populations that need assistance, need support, because those rules have been created to continue to create an environment that's over policing and enforcement. No.
Yes, powerful things, right? And so, she highlights that if they're smoking cannabis in their assisted housing, then maybe it should be treated like how we have smoking tobacco in federally assisting housing. Every senior building, I don't care what state you're in, has a little smoking section. Period, point blank. It may be outside, some may be inside, some may do it in their house. Depends on the state and the town and city. But ultimately, they still allow it. And we're not saying tobacco and cannabis do the same things, because they don't. We know. But we do know that if there is a smoking area, what's the difference in smoking tobacco there and cannabis?
Exactly. The difference is discriminatory practices. And New York did again try to work on some of that limitation on being able to discriminate, people getting the opportunity to actually get into these homes, being a medical patient, not being a deterrent. But yes, you want to let people smoke cancer sticks, right? Because it gives them some level of comfort and feeling, at ease in this environment, but you won't allow them to consume medicine that way. Come on now. And none of it makes any sense. And I'll keep saying, you got to make it make sense, especially if we're paying for these services. These subsidized services are paid for by tax dollars. It is not a private institution that is coming in, giving money and saying, here, do what you need to do to make this a better place. Now, there's some public-private partnerships, but this is mostly what our tax dollars are paid for. And yeah, if I'm there and if a parent is there or a relative is there, it should be the case that they're treated with parity with the other vices that are being allowed for, if you ask me. And let's be honest, again, cannabis can be ingested, it can be consumed in so many ways now that we're not just talking about, do they have a smoking section? Just allowing the products to be on property is an issue. And I think that that's what needs to change. Having those products available, at least, hemp-based CBD products available at the local pharmacy or whatever the community area is for getting those type of medicines. Yeah, that's part of the challenge. So I don't know. I think it's once again poor brown people getting the short end of the stick, while people who have money and access have been taking advantage of all of the benefits of cannabis, from health to wealth.
Right. And they cannot, deny and evict people for it. I think that's hard. It's so harsh, to wait so long, because federally assisted housing takes a long time. So could you imagine waiting all this time, putting your name on list and list, finally getting approved, get up in there, have a medical marijuana card, they come do their little 6-month check, and they be like, oh, what is this? You got to go? Who said that?
Right. The law said that 40, 50 years ago, these draconian laws that we are still holding on to, meanwhile, taking multiple billions of dollars in cannabis tax revenue from states. I'm just saying.
Oh, and being mad they got to count it. With that note, though, let's go. We could go to Mexico.
Yes, go on to 2, please.
We're gonna go to Mexico on hot topic number 2, okay? Because Mexico is a legal state. Yes, it is. It legalized all around that crazy Virginia, New York time. New Mexico also legalized as well. And so New Mexico will start implementing some of their legalization in the next coming month. And, basically, they're going to start allowing people on June 29th to possess up to 2 ounces of cannabis. Okay. They're also trying to still limit medical marijuana patients supply, but they haven't actually said how long they're going to limit it for. But right now, they only are allowed to have a 90-day supply of cannabis medicine. And so they're trying to figure out how they want to do that, because it's 8 ounces for 90 days. So I think they're trying to figure out how they're going to give enough patients, but also manage their actual cultivation sites and retail dispensaries, how they're going to grandfather them into the legalization, because according to someone from the Cannabinoid Industry Association, all of the cannabis producers are restricted to 200 plants maximum to grow for their patient population.
This is silly math that regulators and policymakers be doing. This is not silly math. Yeah, silly. I'm saying it and I'm calling it out. I'm too smart to have these conversations personally. I'll be real. Sometimes I'm listening and I'm like, what is happening? It's almost like the right hand and the left hand are not paying attention at all to what the other is doing. And it isn't adding up and it is creating these crazy bottlenecks. So let's just talk about the fact that I don't believe that regulation, or really legislation, let me just be clear. Legislation is the law, and it's what the legislators or lawmakers do to put together. It's a lot of more permanency, although you can amend and change legislation. It just can take a long time. And regulation is more the policy and something that is a little bit more changeable, is subject to who's in charge, who's the current lawmakers. But for the most part, those roles are still administrators, people who actually have to run the business unit, execute it, and they're less political. But it's more functional. It's like, we need this to be functional, but this is all just so dysfunctional. And the legislature or the laws tend to set us up for that. And that's exactly what this is doing. It's setting up for dysfunction. For one, I just don't think that any lawmaker should be deciding the limit for anyone, period. I think we have so much to relearn. And part of it is that we allow so much sugar to be bought. And that is way more dangerous than cannabis flower. And yet we are doing all of this effort to really limit that on a person. And it's like, that actually is the lifeline to creating all of your medicine. And you do need to start with a good amount of biomass. Like, it's like, I'm tired of saying it. Every place that they're talking about, I would be out of the,
90-day minutes,
right? I know, because I know what I'm doing to cannabis, and that would require more than what they're saying, but they don't know. And then they don't know how many milligrams of any of the cannabinoids or terpenes may potentially be in an ounce. And then you talk about letting people grow stuff, and you don't know about yield, like how much do you actually yield from the flower that you grow? And it just becomes, again, a nonsensical conversation. I go back to, I'm too smart to be in this conversation, and I start checking out slowly, because it's like, what are we talking about? Not even real math here that is being done. So I'm curious about what is the justification, I guess. Why?
Well, there is no justification right now. Now, these things were ran up through their health department. But now with legalization, they're creating a whole new department for regulation and licensing of cannabis. And they're hoping, they gave themselves a deadline of April 1st, 2022, but they are hoping that they get it done a lot sooner so they can make sense of something that just doesn't make sense, to your point. People are very nervous, the actual business owners in the cannabis industry in New Mexico, but the patients are equally as nervous about what is going to happen on the 29th when everybody and their mama can at least have 2 ounces on them, right? How is the illicit market going to trample that? Or how will medical marijuana patients, if they open up sooner and people are grandfathered in, how will medical marijuana patients guarantee their access to products if it opens up sooner?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been, I think debating this for a while. And I go back to the fact that we have to develop a medical market and not one that is competitive with the adult use market because they're integrated. We have to understand that there are models. They're not perfect models. You can't go exactly plug this in, plug this out. But we've got to be smart and look at the models. We have an over-the-counter model that coexists quite fine with the pharmaceutical version or the prescribed version or a medical program version, right? Where you can walk up to a window and get the same exact drugs, but you don't pay nothing because you got an insurance coverage and it came from the doctor's prescription. Or you can choose to walk the aisles and look at the different consumer products that are available. Are you going to buy the CVS brand of ibuprofen or are you going to buy Advil, right? Like, what are you doing? And I think that that's the part where we're not getting those type of benchmarks right. And we're assuming that the adult use market is where everything is big. And no, we forget, like, pharmaceutical prescription, that's big money too. That's why our insurance is big money. It's like, follow the money and make more sense of this here. If this was federally legal, then the insurance companies will have quite a bit of I think, a field day opportunity in terms of trying to figure out how they're going to cover cannabis, right? And given how many people really do need this as a medicinal product and do want guidance from a medical professional, you can see that if we did this right, we'd have a lot more penetration there. Oklahoma is not necessarily even doing it right, but they just at least allow it to be ubiquitous and available and not a real big issue getting into the market. And they've captured 10% of the state. If you look at what the ailments are, we know how many people are going to the doctor. We track all those type of data. Now, we're not telling who's who, but HIPAA, because of HIPAA, but we know how many people are going for high blood pressure. We know how many people are going for stress. We know how many people are going for PTSD. So if you look at that percentage of people that are in the market using all of these pharmaceuticals, and that could potentially be medical cannabis patients and part of that program, we're talking about, again, billions of dollars. We're missing it, and would also shop freely on their own an adult use market. Why? Because that's where innovation, maybe, your medicine isn't coming in the form of something that's as fun or as branded or as experiential as the adult use market, but it is as effective, right? And that ibuprofen 800 milligram looked like nothing but a big white pill. But then,
a horse pill. That's what we called it, a horse pill growing up. Pill.
But meanwhile, Advil was looking like M&Ms back in the day. They had to change that, actually, because they used to be circular and have like a little coating, like sugar type coating that made it hard. But yeah, and you get a whole experience, women dancing through the fields, and people want to be looking like they're going out learning how to do salsa. These are the commercials we experience on that side. Still effective though. So it's like we are missing that for the cannabis space, and that means building this medical market, and that's what I would encourage New Mexico absolutely to do. Absolutely.
Yes, encourage them to do it, and encourage them to have a diverse, regulation and licensing process, because then they'll understand the different types of needs that will need to have different tiers of types of businesses within the cannabis space within that state. But I'm excited. I feel like New Mexico sometimes gets left out of the hoopla because they legalize at the same time as two huge states, and then they also have Arizona, which is legal now, just leaning right on them, and they kind of mimic Arizona a lot. So I'm excited for them to see what they're going to do and how they implement it. But you made some powerful points, and I can't top that. So we might as well head to hot topic number 3, because the MORE Act just dropped. Yeah, you guys heard it. The MORE Act 2021 just dropped.
Ooh, yes. Of course, we had to talk about this. I mean, at the end of the day, it just dropped yesterday, so we're not going to give you a full-on deep dive. You're going to have to come back next week and hear our MORE Act deep dive. But I just want to remind you, as you take a look at the bill, what the MORE Act stands for is Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. And so those important things: opportunity, reinvestment, and expungement are what we are scrutinizing. I've been working on a DPA federal work group, among others, with people like Representative Blumenthal and Representative Barbara Lee, who are the sponsors of this bill. No surprise there. But yeah, we've been working on improving what happened in 2020. 2020, the MORE Act did have a historic passing through the House of Representatives. So we definitely expect that there's support still, because this is a better bill. But we had some challenges. There wasn't necessarily seeing automatic expungement push upon the states. And we know there are going to be some states that require that or have some sort of tax a penalty in some way, or support penalty by not doing the expungement piece of it. In order for this to be an impactful bill, it has to be implemented in some ways at the state level, in the states that don't want to implement, in the states that want to do things like Mississippi just did, which is repeal ballot initiatives that got voted into place. So I just want to reiterate that when you look for it, we're looking for real specific language. The last thing was the last 2020 bill also included that if you had a prior felony, essentially within cannabis, you could not participate. It had lifted language from a tobacco statute. And this is part of the challenge I have, again, and why I continue to say we could talk all about tobacco and alcohol. And absolutely, the Tobacco and Alcohol Taxation Bureau, they've been in the mix of things and really doing their due diligence to educate themselves on what they may have to do. But this is not tobacco or alcohol. This is still something that, again, is coexisting with a medical market and medical need. And people are going to shop this market. And people need to understand that when they're building out these plans. I think having also all the work we've done in equity to be inclusive of the people who've been most harmed. That means you have an incarceration or arrest related to cannabis, giving you a priority licensing in that regard, and a whole bunch of other support, and your family and community. That's what equity looks like. And that bill last year, I couldn't support it because it didn't include that primary nucleus, that person who has the felony, right? And how do we do that? How do we say we're going to start a new industry as a government after criminalizing it all these years, these decades, and not include those people we criminalize, or at least give them the opportunity to make something of it? I posted something that got, and this is the last thing I said, that got a lot of interesting responses, was related to what licensing is. Yes, I'm a regulator, but I got to call it out what it is. The government has an accountability issue. We were at one point pointing guns at people holding cannabis plants, and now we got the cannabis plant in our hand legally, and we're telling them, no, now you got to pay us for us to give it back to you. And I do think that that is, part of the problem. If we're doing that, and the people agree to that exchange, right? What happens with that money that gets put back into the government? Is it being put back into more enforcement, more guns, more things that are necessarily, we've shown, bad for our communities, or are we revitalizing them? And that's where our accountability has to play.
I love the fact that you said America does have accountability issue, because I know it's so random, you guys, but please just follow me here. Cancel culture. Cancel culture is such a huge thing. Oh, you need to cancel culture. And it's like, cancel culture is actually not canceling the person. We're not deading them for life. We're not throwing them away to hell. We are canceling them in terms of they need to take accountability for doing this whack thing that, humans do make whack choices. And we're going to hold their feet to the fire. And we're going to tell them that they need to take accountability and why it was wrong. And so I do definitely feel you on the core pits of my soul on America has an accountability issue, because it is interesting even now having to tell everyday people that, hey, Mississippi was about to change the whole South cannabis the way they've been implementing their program, they were about to change that whole southern bottom state row. Mm-hmm. And they just threw it out because the lawmakers don't do their jobs, right? Because the census they created a law that they didn't realize could literally be taken out due to the census. And that happened the very next time they had the census. Is like, that is disgusting and despicable. And I literally, and like, we need some protection for that. So we need to figure out how we put it in law, how we protect these states from being able to overturn the people's choice. 90% of Americans want cannabis.
Absolutely. But that's also why when you don't have mandatory expungement at the state level, first of all, anybody that understands how cannabis worked through the last 40 years, if you caught a federal charge, you caught a state charge too. And so giving someone the opportunity to expunge at the federal level, but then not allowing that same capability at the state level doesn't necessarily free the person. And I think that that's the problem. It's like, again, I feel like, a conversation that is just, if you think about the common sense of it. And so, but we got state right issues. Okay, fine. You can't tell the states what to do, but you do provide, as a big brother, if you will, all of these support systems. And you've done it in the past. There were things in the past where, Louisiana was not trying to do something that had been passed. And they were like, all right, fine, we're not going to give you money for the roads. Eventually, they had to start implementing. And I think that that's the way that this law has to be written, in a way that shows that expungement is not an option throughout the system. And if you choose that option, there will be some consequences. And the most that actually matter are the financial ones for a state governor. You understand? And so, I totally think that it's important for us to keep our foot on the gas, and MORE Act is a good step forward. I'm looking forward to diving deeper into what 2021 looks like. We'll share that next week. And so definitely join us, but we absolutely have to, keep pressing, because one win is only a precedent for the next win, right? And shout out to Connecticut that's currently in that fight. Jason Ortiz, Representative Robin Porter. This is the work, and we'll continue to be at that fight on the federal level as well.
Yeah, it's accountability. It sounds like integrity, and shout out to the people that just don't give up. That's how that's like that Jordan gene. He kept getting to the playoffs, but never actually making it to the championship. And he was like, each time he was like, "That's one more step. That's one more step." So, like, that's what we're in right now, cannabis, just so y'all know.
we're in the playoffs, for real.
We're in the playoffs, but to try to keep getting that, to finally get that real win, that real championship win. Because I feel like we've been getting wins, but we need the championship. Okay, hello. And we've trying to get all these dream teams together for all these new legalized states. And let's get into the main topic, because we want to talk to people about Virginia. They legalized in April, and they actually reworked their legalization too quite quickly as well. So we had to talk about it just a little bit, not a super deep dive, but a quick overview, because they got some important steps that they're trying to take action on, and we feel like we need more people of color to know what's happening.
1000%, especially when you think about what you just said about Mississippi changing, that's the deep South. Virginia is the start of the South, and it is the first state, to be honest, in the South that has really legalized with equity involved somehow. And I've got to definitely shout out Nigist Abebe. Like, she's been working. She's in the DC, Virginia area. She's the VP of Public Policy for Columbia Care, which is a multi-state operator. And they're so lucky to have her, because she just definitely has been part of, Virginia, in my opinion, really coming out the gate with something that's respectable, at least, as opposed to feeling like this just the Jim Crow version of cannabis legalization, like Georgia.
Shit. Well, I am speechless, you guys, because the shade was just real. Okay.
Just 0
Yes.
to 100.
I mean, I guess Virginia is below the Mason-Dixon line, as a Southern Belle would say, but well, I don't know how much Southern we consider them, but they are the first one to have real legalization, and it's way better than anything so far down here. And it did happen on April 21st, and July 1st is really when they are permitting adult use cannabis for adults 21 and older. And with adult use will become gifting marijuana. They say they don't want the DC version, but they do want to allow some gifting because they understand some people won't be allowed to actually cultivate, but they do have personal use cultivation up to 4 plants. And they still have this 2024, believe it or not, adult use market deadline. And they basically are allowing people to have up to an ounce with no civil penalty on them. And if they have in between more than an ounce and under a pound, it's a $25 civil fine. However, if you are caught with more than a pound on July 1st, 2021, you will be serving up to 1 to 10 years in prison.
Well, it's not perfect, but it is something, and it is definitely something that is a lot better than what we ever expected from Virginia. It happened, I feel like, overnight in some ways. The fact of the matter is that we've had a lot of, ambiguity in the DMV area. Maryland legalized with a medical market. DC just decriminalized, yet it's still the case that they have like a 10 times more likely rate that a Black person is going to be stopped and questioned for public use, because that wasn't allowed. More recently, DC legalized something, but we still are unclear. And so this is the first time, honestly, that there's been some real, I think, movement on a legalization bill that actually makes sense in that area, right?
Right.
And let's be honest that because of the ambiguity in DC and Maryland, and the fact that you're driving through, guess who was getting the bulk of the possession stops that were still happening? In Virginia, right? And guess who were the people dealing with that? Black and brown. And so I think this is a good move. I think that all of the colleges in that area should support it, because we know that those are their students that are getting these charges. And I'm really just more so impressed that it's, again, there's a breadth to the bill. It's not one-dimensional, and that means that there's some opportunity to keep moving it forward. And I think that that's only going to happen with the leadership. And so, of course, I was real excited to see that they actually are having a public process for creating that leadership team, unlike some other states, right? Where you don't even know what's happening. It's all happening behind closed doors. So I'm definitely telling everybody about that.
Yes, and we still have to tell them about employers not being able to prohibit employees from using cannabis, not discriminating against them, discipline them, or discharging them if they are, are a medical marijuana patient and they happen to maybe have it on their person at work. And so they put into law that they are protecting people from cannabis oil for medical marijuana, and so this is pretty much something that was not allowed before that they wrote into law now. And that also is effective July 1st. So, if you are a medical marijuana patient and you are on a drug test for your job, you will be protected in the state of Virginia.
That's great that they are actually doing a good job of really being explicit about it. Oregon has that cannabis should be treated like medicine in its law, but it doesn't actually happen in practice. And honestly, because it's a medical ailment, it does fall under HIPAA protection. I mean, you read the definition of what falls under HIPAA is personal information, personal medical information. And so if you have a medical card, that information should be protected. I don't have to tell people about my prescriptions in certain roles and most roles, as long as it is clear that I'm not going to be impaired when I'm at the job, right? And that's the same way. And let's be real, cannabis consumption continues to happen in the legacy market, has been happening. And one thing that when New York legalizing allows us to do is us admitting that we already have responsible consumption going on. We just are now more aware of it because the legalization means we have to talk about it. But it's been happening. It's been happening for decades, and across the board at the same rates, across the board in every community. But it is, again, more so Black and brown and impoverished individuals that are subject to these, various civil rights that are taken away in employment. And because you need your job and you don't have the ability to just walk away, you're stuck and you're subjected to what I feel like are ridiculous things and standards.
Well, how can Black and brown people help the implementation in Virginia?
Well, I think we got to be a part of it. And what that means is actually applying to participate, because Virginia is actually doing it in a way that allows for that. I was really excited to see the ACLU post about all of the different information related to the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board. And I love that name because they're looking at it in the way that we've been talking about it on the West Coast. And I, am not surprised because we helped testify in Virginia and we also provided advice. We also have the Cannabis Control Authority, or the CCA, and both are being looked at right now for appointments. But unlike other states, and I got to call out New York for this, as we talked about the no norm earlier, is that you just know a little bit more about the process because they listed it almost like a job description or a requisite for any job board. So okay, there's 13 jobs available on the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board. And what you do is you decide how the millions of dollars that will be in cannabis tax revenue will be used in these disproportionately harmed communities, right? You develop programs, educational for marginalized youth. It's looking at it in the way that our social equity and educational development, or SEED initiatives in the city of Portland, is looking at community reinvestment of cannabis tax revenue. That's what this board does. Then the people who should apply are folks that you love or you appreciate, you value, you're working towards racial and economic justice, equity. If you live and work in a disproportionate area that's been impacted by drug enforcement and mass incarceration, or if you have any strong relationships that are impacted in these communities and you have to be a U.S. citizen. It doesn't say you have to be a Virginia resident for this particular role. So I wonder about that. And I encourage people to come out and apply. There's going to be 5 appointees from the governor, and the governor's list in terms of what you might want to have, and you get to click a link, right, to say, I want to be considered for a governor's appointee. You got to be a community service provider. 4 out of the 5, they're looking for that. And then 1 representative of the indigenous community. So I think it's important for folks to check out, again, those details, because community service provider can be across anything: workforce development, youth mentoring, education, job training and placement, and reentry. You also have to have they're in this board 5 coming from the Speaker of the House. And they're very clear. They want someone from the foster care system, someone who has expertise on workforce development, a representative from one of the Virginia HBCUs, 1 veteran entrepreneur in expertise around the emerging industry, or access to capital for small businesses. And then 3 are coming from the Senate. And they basically are looking for someone who has previously been incarcerated or convicted for a cannabis crime. Like that, to me, I just had to get a little like, oh, okay, Virginia.
Y'all for real. Virginia wasn't playing. Okay, they came for legalization.
When I saw the HBCU, I was like, all right, I got a little hype. But then I saw this and I said, listen, I'm gonna have to text niggas, because I'm just like y'all are really doing, and that's precedent. And these are the type of parameters we were outlining as well in Oregon for our Equity Investment Act and what that oversight board would look like. Then they're also looking for an expert in public health with experience in trauma-informed care, and then an expert in education with a focus on access to opportunities for youth in underserved communities. So again, the nomination is due ASAP. It was recommended by yesterday, to be honest, but you can submit as soon as possible. And the board is basically looking to begin working on this by July 1st or sooner. That's the equity board. The control authority has 5 seats and is definitely similar requirements, but you have to be a Virginia resident for the last 3 years who will live in Virginia during your tenure. They want a bachelor's degree in business or a related field and at least 7 years of business or legal experience in U.S. citizenship. So it's a little bit more parameters around the control board, because that, again, that's going to be the regulatory body with the Cannabis Management Office that will do all of the licensing and compliance. And the other is their selection committee. They get to advise on what happens with this money that's going to be reinvested. I'm impressed. I didn't give a golf clap. I gave a whole clap. And I appreciate that all of our insights that we provided and we recommended have been starting to be implemented in Virginia. And I'm excited to see it happen. And I hope Black people really do come out, because we deserve these seats as well.
And they calling us. They said people that have been working in foster care system. I know a lot of Black social workers, okay? People that are been incarcerated. Know a lot of Black people that have been incarcerated and flipped it and doing great, amazing things now. So, again, I am pretty freaking impressed. I will say that I'm pretty impressed with the amount of detail, the ability to publicly say what they're looking for. A lot of times things that feel appointed by different political positions feel very gatekept and gatekeeping going on and stuff like that. So to be able to bring it to the forefront is like, wow, y'all is not playing, okay? They coming for that cannabis capital title, sound like to me. Yes. And that was really powerful, Dasheeda. I believe you may be frozen or doing a great mind challenge, but either way, we are here still. And Dasheeda did click off, so she might be having a couple internet challenges, like we know technology always has. However, our main topic, it was about Virginia taking the next steps to legalization. We did drop in the chat the link to be able to apply to some of these Virginia positions or the steps to apply. And even though they wanted it to be yesterday, you can still apply. It still looks clickable to me. So I definitely would empower people to apply. However, they're doing some great things, and hopefully for the next state to legalize, this is something that they would be able to take on themselves. But thank you guys for watching us and joining us. We are going to be back on Saturday next week at the same time, noon Eastern Standard. And that was Dasheeda Dawson. So if you guys are ever looking to see what she's talking about or what's happening with the WeedHead, make sure you follow her at Dasheeda Dawson on Instagram. Okay. And we just love Dasheeda. And then there's me, Ice. If you're just looking for some good kiki fun, you can always follow me on IG at Cannabis Socialite. And then we are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, Apple Podcasts. I said that already. But make sure you guys binge us anytime. And you can join us next week at noon and hopefully better internet. But thanks for joining us. Bye.